This is Tipping the Scale, where ESG meets action and we explore the future of sustainable business.
That's what we do every Monday. We have had for the last couple of weeks, just, life happens. But we back. Bernadette Boulle is in studio. Bernadette, good morning. How are you doing?
Good morning, Sam. I'm so excited to be in studio with you and the team.
Yeah, it's lovely to have you in studio as well. For those that don't know, what is the mandate of the show?
So Tipping the Scale is really about having us learn about ESG concepts and news, and really understanding how this affects South African consumers, and how do we tip the scale into the positive? How do we make positive contributions to ensure that ESG compliance is within our scope, not just for companies, but also just for individuals like ourselves, and who are trying to be green, who are trying to be environmentally sustainable, but are also trying to adhere to governance. Right? Yeah.
And then the format is quite simple. We look at a term, we unpack a story, and we tell you where to go if it moves you in any way. Left, right, top, bottom, whatever. What's the big kind of term that we're getting to grips with this week?
So this week we'll be dealing with the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, and it categorizes emissions into 3 scopes. I think we all assume that emission is emission, so therefore it is fine. But it's quite important for us to understand the different types of emissions. So you have something called direct emission. So this is when it's generated by organizations' operations. So running a machine, manufacturing products, driving our vehicles as well, heating buildings, providing power to devices. That's direct emission. So it's something that we do and has a direct effect. An indirect emission is generated by an organization's energy purchase and usage. So the example would be electricity purchase from the grid, steam or heat purchase from the third party, and this can be reduced by investing in renewable energy sources. The last scope is indirect emissions, and it really speaks to the value chain, and it says it's generated by an organization's customer and supplier activities. So examples would be supply chain emissions, e.g. raw material extraction, transportation again is there, product use emissions, e.g. Customers using products, employee commuting, and business travel. We just think that by the time they get to the office, we don't need to. But the fact that you've got an employee that's getting on transport to get into the office space, that alone is also indirect. And then it's often the most challenging to track and measure, but it's also typically the largest contributing to an organization's overall emissions footprint. So understanding these scopes really helps us understand and identify areas for emission reduction and how we can improve and develop strategies to mitigate their climate change. So we talked about employees going to an office space. There's something called lift clubs, and saying, okay, how do we, instead of taking 3 cars, let's take 1 car and make sure that instead of having such a big impact, we kind of consolidate that.
But that means you would have to like the people.
Confirm, right? You can't be sitting with them for an hour and a half in traffic, and then they listen to this music, and I don't like this music.
Anyway.
Yeah, but also working from home is another way of reducing it, right?
Yes.
And so that's the big term, and it's really taken from the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, which categorizes the 3 types of emissions and the scopes.
And then is our big story for the week.
Our big story is really much aligned to this, because it talks about how South African retail sector, only 24% of retailers listed on the JSE have publicly disclosed net zero commitments. So 86% of these retailers have already disclosed emission reduction strategies. So it talks about how, we keep talking about these emissions, but how are South Africans faring? So with this information, we're knowing that only 24% of them are geared towards this. And this actually comes from something that's been happening in France, where France introduced a policy really trying to look at the growing environmental impact of retail industry and how they've made headlines in the last week. So the France Senate has been approving a bill that directly addresses the environmental impact of the fashion industry, and it proposes that we regulate overproduction and overconsumption. And it's one of the things I always try to say: we keep buying, and we don't really think about the end product, the end cycle. You buy these nice tackies today, but do you think about at the end of that journey?
Where they're going to end up.
Where's it going to end up,
and if
right?
you're not careful, they're going to end up in your food source, which will then end up back in your tummy.
Absolutely. Right?
And it's something we need to think about, really.
And so it's quite important for us to start thinking about it just for retailers, because people are trying to be sustainable. South Africa is one of those countries that has taken up this challenge, but a lot more needs to be done. If you're comparing it, it's only 24% of companies who've adopted these strategies and saying not only are they strategies, but they're implementing them. What about the other percentage that are still, on the fence? So South African legislation has a robust environmental regulatory framework. And so the company's net zero journey should begin with legislative compliance. So from an operational perspective, certain provisions of the Climate Change Act of 2024 came into force in South Africa, and these provisions paved the way for governments to determine whether sectoral emissions for these emissions and subsectors, as well as establish these emissions to provide a threshold. And so to identify that you're not just providing these drafts and all of that, but how do you action it and when is your starting point?
Yeah, it's very, very interesting. And just a friend of mine listening from Ireland was just sending me a link to a platform, an organization in Ireland that is called Catch My Carbon. And it's all about, how do you offset your output by planting trees. So there are kind of interesting ways of kind of how you can do this. One of the things while you were talking, I was thinking about how do we relate this to the ordinary person, and one of the things that you were saying is that lift clubs as one of them. You talked about tackies and stuff. So think about the output in terms of fast fashion. Lots of us are unfortunately now subscribing to the idea of fast fashion or buying our clothes from organizations that practice that. I'm not going to name and shame, but we know there's a fair amount of them coming out of China, right? And then think about, for example, the kind of reuse, recycle, and repair idea on a day-to-day basis. What can you reuse, what can be recycled, and what can be repaired? And often we have, for example, a tear in our jeans and we throw it away. Where, I mean, if you take it to a really good seamstress or whoever, a tailor, that person can be able to repair it, and you can actually, that's a valuable way of contributing, right? Think about if it is possible, fly less. If you can, that's potentially 100%. Another one. The other way also practically is to shop local, right? Locally produced, it reduces transport emissions. In terms of kind of the further we buy away from our sources, the more it has to be imported. So how can we buy locally made products and support local businesses that can have an impact? Eat lower on the food chain. So think, for example, choose more plant-based meals, meat, dairy, and they come with high emissions. And then also something that we struggle with: buy less, buy better. Support sustainable brands with low carbon footprints. And I think you're going to have to, and I don't know, maybe is there an index that can tell you which brands, which products, which stores are, for example, more sustainable and has a low carbon footprint?
There was an interesting link that we did, and I think you would know that I'm doing my master's in journalism, and one of the interesting topics was ESG, and she provided us with a link where you can actually see what you as an individual are emitting. I'll be able to provide that for you next week. But it really talks to the different type of food groups. If you eat less meat, it would mean that you're being user-friendly to the environment. And so I'll definitely be able to provide that for us next week. But I think it's quite important for these kind of things to not just, and actually, as much as ESG is such a topical discussion, and we are really trying to bring awareness into this space, Africa is not having a big footprint as the way the world has been publicizing it. If you compare it to other more industrialized countries, your Europeans, the USA and the likes, Africa doesn't have such a big footprint, but it doesn't stop us from being quite proactive in that regard. And so,
and the idea of offsetting, for example, I mean, we now live in a world where you can purchase your credits, which is kind of a weird science, but anyway, in terms of your direct emissions as a person, think of this: drive less, walk, cycle, or use public transport when possible, considering the limitation to public transport. Use fuel efficient or electric vehicles, considering what that means currently in the environment. Maintain appliances and heating systems for energy efficiency. Avoid burning waste or wood unnecessarily. Now, of course, I'm not saying that the person who wants to braai every weekend should stop braaiing. That's not what I'm saying. Think of also switching to energy efficient appliances and LED lighting. Install solar panels where you can. Unplug devices where you can. I'll tell you something interesting the other day. I was watching a video of this really smart gentleman. I don't know what he's on one of the Instagram pages. And he was talking about, instead of boiling an entire kettle, only boil the amount of water that you need for your cup of coffee. What we tend to do is, which is horrific, is that we boil the kettle and 20 minutes later you boil the kettle again.
I do that like by default.
Yeah, and what he is saying is you're using so much energy and keep on using the kettle, when in actual fact only boil the amount of water that you need for that moment.
I thought that would be wastage.
But it is wastage, coming back 10 minutes later and boiling the kettle again, because it takes more energy to boil the kettle when it's full.
Yes, actually.
It takes less energy when there's less water in the kettle.
And with load shedding, I think just by default, I'm like, I must always have hot water, so I'll just boil it. Like, let's just boil everything.
Yeah, and then you don't even use it. So what are we doing is we're walking around our homes, we just switch on the kettle because we pass it, but there's no plan to use the water in the next, after it's boiled.
Exactly.
It's just to keep boiling water. Rather invest in a boiling system that restaurants have. So you can just open up a tap on the wall and the water's always,
and
invest
it's hot.
in that. Yeah, because I have the same horrible habit. Well, I mean, I've stopped it now, but
or just charging our phones for the sake of anytime.
Yeah, you leave your phone on charge. In actual fact, it damages the battery.
Yeah, it does. It damages your battery for sure.
Okay. Anyway, so there's a couple of ways. Just think about how you can make an impact, and we can lower our footprint. We're not saying you must become a hippie. Not that there's anything wrong with my brothers and sisters or our hippies. I'm just saying,
they use less water.
Let's live consciously.
Absolutely.
So that we can actually make an impact. What's the big event?
So SALT SA ESG conference supported by SAPIS. So I'll break these terms down. Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport in South Africa is hosting a conference to provide a platform to assess and address the integration of environmental, social, and ESG. And I like this because it's really themed around what we're talking about. And so it's going to be hosted on the 24th of July from 8 to 4. It's going to be at the Focus Rooms in Heaton Lane in Waterfontein. And their theme is measuring impact, managing change. So I love this thematic consistency in what we're saying about how do you, from a logistics perspective, become more sustainable in how you work. And I love that the industry is coming together and it's not just a silo conversation. So some of the key topics that the agenda will include would be what and how of climate sustainability and circularity. And it's a term that we've used here and spoken and broken down before. Navigating uncertainty, so the global volatility and African sustainability. And then carbon broaden adjustment mechanism, so the immediate action plan. And so the agenda is really jam-packed, but it's also quite important for industry players to book their spots. Early booking is recommended, and this will be taking place on the 24th of July. I'm hoping I can make it, definitely. But yeah, definitely something worth considering. I'm going to repeat it again on the 24th of July from 8 to 4.
Yes.
It's going to be at the Focus Rooms. The theme is measuring impact, managing change.
And then also don't forget on the 17th of July at Alexander Forbes in Sandton.
Yes.
There's Bragg, which is the best results achievements gathering.
Absolutely.
16 top brands will come and share with us how they are changing South Africa for the better.
Absolutely.
Not challenges, they're sharing their success stories. So if you want to see some of your favorite brands, brands like Telkom, Standard Bank, Cotton On, Bolt, Vumatel, the fiber company,
Engine,
and the list goes on, and Engine as well. If you want to learn how they are doing amazing things for South Africa. It's an absolutely free event, but tickets are limited.
Yeah.
You're going to have to, and it's a very simple, you can go to LinkedIn on the social TV platform on LinkedIn, or you can email press@social-tv.co.za. That's press@social-tv.co.za, and come and meet the men and women who run the CSI departments for these organizations. Pizza Hut will be there as well. And these guys are doing amazing things for South Africa. It's a free event at Alexander Forbes. And if you're a business, an organization, or an individual, and you just love these brands, you'll be blown away about how much they care about this country. That's on the 17th of July. It's going to be amazing.
I think what is nice, it really aligns with the Nelson Mandela Day theme for 2025, and it says it's in your hands.
Literally the day before
exactly.
Mandela Day.
And so it's nice to see how brands are walking within that Madiba spirit, right? And I'm looking forward to, I'm definitely going to be there, and I'm really asking everyone who's listening, if you're looking for Mandela Day initiative, maybe this is the one.
Yeah, maybe this is the one. Come and find out. Come and meet your community of corporates, organizations, institutions that are every day on the ground, in communities, working. And the cool thing about it is, I think it's going to change the way you see Pizza Hut, the way you see Telkom, the way you see Cotton On, the way you see Standard Bank, because they're coming to brag. They're coming to share what they're doing, and I think it's going to be amazing. Okay, that's a wrap. We'll be back again with Bernadette. Bernadette, as always, it's lovely learning and being on this journey together.
Awesome. Great to be in studio.
This is Tipping the Scale, where ESG meets action and we explore the future of sustainable business.